everyone. Welcome to episode 79 of Pivot with Dr. Malaika. Listen, I'm so excited to bring to you conversations with folks who have experienced intentional or unexpected changes. But guess what? They come out on the winning side. And so today in this episode, I have, and I'm going to read first, and then we're going to get into some conversation. But I'm going to read about this brother because there's a lot that we're going to delve into, and there's a lot that I want to share. But Terrance DeAndre Ellis, known as Terrance Dre. He is a dynamic leader whose life story intertwines faith, professional excellence, and innovative entrepreneurship. 2 decades dedicated to transformative leadership, he has profoundly impacted communities, individuals, and corporations. Terrance boasts a 15-year award-winning career marked by his leadership roles, and outstanding achievements. From individual contributions to leading teams, he has been instrumental in generating and closing over 15 million in sales, demonstrating exceptional skill and dedication in his field. He has founded and led businesses like, tell me if I'm saying this right, 13 Touches.
13 Touches, you got
Awesome.
it.
13 Touches Printing, E5 Mobile Entertainment, Cream and Ice, Exquisite Cleaning, and Terramay Consulting. These enterprises collectively generated over $2 million. And this reflects his versatile business acumen and commitment to providing quality services. Now, on a personal tip, he is married and has been married to May Ellis for 18 years.
18.
18. Okay,
Yes,
come on.
Lord. Come through here, 18.
He's a devoted father to Tiara, Trinity, Terrance Jr. or TJ, Taryn, and Tyler. His personal motto, and we'll talk more about this, is purpose over preference.
Absolutely.
Pivot family, I want you to welcome Terrance Dre to Pivot with Dr. Malaika. Listen, thank you so much for being here with us and taking this time. How are you?
I'm doing outstanding. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm just so
Oh my
glad you're here with
gosh.
us on
Listen, I'm happy to be here. I made it. I'm on Pivot with Dr. Malika. Listen, I made it. I'm so excited.
And I didn't even mention this, but he is an author of the book Pivoting for Greatness. And we're going to talk more about this. We're going to talk about where you can get it. So don't just hold on. But Terrance Dre, talk a little bit about you. How are you? What's new? What's exciting? Tell Pivot family about who Terrance Dre is.
Yeah, absolutely. So Pivot family, I am so happy to be here. I'm happy to be joining you. I love me some Dr. Malika. So we have a nice personal bond that we can speak about a little bit later. But ultimately, I'm just in a place right now where I am in the midst of a pivot. I am constantly pivoting. And ultimately, I'm just excited about what is happening, about the opportunities that exist in our world today. About just living in purpose, with purpose, moving in purpose. And so again, I'm just extremely excited to be here.
So you know what, I will say I had the honor of reading and doing a little review, just a little something for Pivot for Greatness. And the one thing that when we talked about the review, it was like the pieces started coming together. I thought, wait a minute, we've got the podcast Pivot, we've got the Go Be Great. So we're talking the same language.
Yeah.
And what I love about what you've done is that you've packaged it together so that industries, corporations, individuals can really think through their pivot experience, the impact of a pivot, and how to come out on the other side of a pivot. And I want you to talk a little bit about the birth of, like, how did you pivot, if you will,
How did I pivot? Yeah.
to this point where you decided, I think I need to write a book about this topic.
Absolutely. So I would say this has probably been something for the last in the making for about the last 15 years. So just a bit of background. I am on the spiritual side of things. I am a ordained minister. And so I've done that for 20 plus years, believe it or not. Don't let the gray hairs. I'm still, but
Still young.
it's still young. But yeah, I've done ministry for almost 20 plus years. So I started when I was in college. I went to Howard University, Durrell HU. Shout out.
Shout
Uh,
out.
but while I was at Howard, I ultimately, received the calling to go into ministry. And so I started preaching around 21 years old. Again, I've been doing it for over 20 plus years. But my father is a pastor, and so I got a chance to really see kind of ministry, behind the scenes. I saw the good, the bad, and the ugly,
Yes.
um, and to kind of cut across the field, just in seeing a lot of things when it came to ministry and church. I started seeing that, hey, you know what, we're kind of a little bit behind the times,
Mm,
with certain things, and so really God started kind of giving me a burden about what things would look like, how the church almost needs to pivot, and
yeah.
just how we went from the church to I started looking at our communities, and I started looking at individuals, and how sometimes we get so caught up in the just the mundaneness of life, or we
Yes.
get caught up in the minutia or the circumstances of life. And I started noticing how we kind of fall into these ruts,
Yes.
where it's just like we're on a hamster wheel, and we're just constantly going round and around, but there's really no progress being made. And so I found myself in that place personally. And so ultimately, God started dealing with me about this whole thing about pivoting, and about the future, and moving forward. And so I would probably say here recently, within the last year and a half, after really kind of holding on to some things, I started writing. I started kind of getting into the process of writing. So I've always liked to read.
Yes.
I've always been an avid reader. And then I just started doing some writing just all of a sudden about, hey, this is kind of how I think things would look, here and there.
Mhm.
And yeah, next thing you know, I'm writing, and I got chapters, and then chapters are starting to turn into books. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, I may have something here.
I may have you. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. But and what I love about this is it's not it's for the individual, but it's also for the college, the university,
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
divisions, the corporations, the Fortune 5, you know what I'm saying? Come on, the Fortune
Absolutely.
500s, the sales departments, the student affairs division, the academic side of the house, the
A little bit of
church,
everything.
the big churches, the small churches. And I think this book is just, it's the textbook for navigating change on every level.
Every level. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because a lot of those of as you shared in my bio, a lot of those, backgrounds or excuse me, a lot of those things is where I have background, right? So
Right.
I've been in the sales, I've been to board meetings, I've been a part of big, small church.
Hmm.
I've seen all those things. Haven't
Right.
been heavily involved in higher ed, but I've done my fair share of selling to higher ed again. So I
Right.
understand those different dynamics. And so, yeah, it was one of those things where, trust me, when I started writing, it wasn't really intended for it to be to any particular group.
Right.
And I think it kind of came across that way, that eventually that it was like, yeah, the finished product was, it really speaks to just about anybody and everybody, because we all have to go through some type of pivot, whether it's in our career, whether it's in our personal life, whether it's in our
Absolutely.
in our family, whatever it may happen,
Mhm.
there's something where it's going to cause us to have to pivot. So
Yes. So in 2024, when you're looking at, you are a business owner and
mhm.
have been for a mighty long time, but in 2024, what are you seeing are some of the challenges with folks or businesses pivoting? What are some of the challenges that we're facing that are keeping us from pivoting and hitting on, like I said in the beginning, hitting the winning side of the
Yeah,
pivot?
absolutely. So I would probably say, and this is part of the book,
Mhm.
I would talk about this fixed mindset. So Carol Dweck, who's is a renowned professor out of Stanford University, she's done this great just work just around growth mindset.
Mhm.
And it talks about the difference between growth mindset and fixed mindset. So I do reference it in the book. And basically, what that is just a fixed mindset is more or less you're relying on your abilities.
Yeah.
You're relying on your gifts, you're relying on your talents. And so a lot of times we think that's more static. And so if I don't have a necessary gift or ability, that fixed mindset pretty much kind of keeps me rooted in this rut, right? That
Right.
I'm only going to be as good as whatever my college degree is or whatever my intellect may be.
Hmm.
Where the growth mindset is just always, hey, I'm looking to get better. I'm always becoming. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges right now is that people are just so fixated just on kind of what they have, their limitations on what they have or what they don't
Right.
have. Perhaps they don't have all the tools that they think they need.
Hmm.
Um, and so a lot of times that is what's causing a little bit of a disruption. And now I think the other thing is just kind of the lack of adaptability.
Okay.
You got to be able to adapt. That's ultimately what pivoting is. It's just about adaptability, and,
Right.
and I talk about that in the book as well about AQ. Your adaptability quotient. People are familiar with IQ. People are
Right.
familiar with EQ. So EQ, of course, is the emotional intelligence. IQ is intellectual intelligence, but that AQ is the adaptability quotient, the ability to kind of pivot and adapt, to see and assess what the situation is, and saying, okay, I need to go in this direction instead of going in that direction.
Absolutely. Two things that came to my mind as you were talking about that fixed mindset. And a lot of times I think the fixed mindset was birthed through upbringing. So
Yes,
someone telling you what you can do, this is what we have, this is the financial place we're in, this is the
exactly.
level, this is where we live, this is what you're able to do, this is what I used to do, so this is what you
Yep.
can do.
Yep.
And what that lacks is faith that God is able to empower and to provide us with this ability beyond our limitations. So I know
Absolutely.
faith is a huge part of who you are. It's like the core of who you are and the direction of your life. Can you talk a little bit about that idea of where, I know Carol Dweck talks about the growth mindset and fixed mindset. And so how does faith come into play with that?
Yeah, because I think obviously, if we're gonna go there, let's go there.
Yeah.
So,
You don't mind,
let's
do you?
no, not at all. So, I think first of all, the first scripture that comes to mind is, where the Bible talks about, well, with God, all things are possible.
That's right.
And so, that's the wonderful thing about it is, and especially now, I'll deal with this other part first. But when you look at God and you have God in your life and you have God with you, it just makes everything that you could possibly imagine or think. It makes it live. It makes
Right.
it possible. It makes it, it makes it as something that we can most definitely accomplish. And so, yes, the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset. Of course, it is more of a spirit, right? It's a the spirit of a thing.
Right.
But of course, it's the spirit of God that we have working within us that allows us to be able to do these impossible things, these unthinkable things, these unimaginable things. And one of the great things that I love about God is that a lot of times when we think about God and we think about how He's going to do the great and uncommon things in us, we think it
Mm.
has to be spectacular. Um,
Yes.
and He doesn't always operate in the spectacular.
Yes.
Think about the time, with Elijah, when Elijah was in the cave, and of course, you had he said, "Hey, go in the cave. I want to show you my presence." There was a hurricane, there was there was a fire, there was wind, and all those things. And he said, "I wasn't in none of those things, but you heard me in a still small voice." And sometimes it's that still
Little
small
thing.
voice, right,
Yeah.
that is needed, that helps us get out of our mundaneness, get out of our mindset, get out of our our poor habits and those things. And that's what helps us with that growth mentality, so that
Right.
we are doing supernatural things beyond our comprehension, beyond our our grade level or our
Mm.
comprehension level, or beyond what our degree says or what we don't have, and all those things. So it's all about the grace of God.
I love that. And I love the purpose statement that I saw on your website, to build a mindset of greatness in people,
Yeah,
because change starts with the mindset. I've always believed that your mind, what you think, what you plant, what you rehearse up here will activate what you do.
absolutely. So again, the Bible talks about life and death is in the power of the tongue. So it's in what you say.
Right.
But also, a unique thing about our mindset is that our mind does not have the ability to differentiate, what's imaginative and what's real.
Hmm.
So the Bible talks about as a man thinketh,
So is
so
he.
is he.
Hmm.
Right? And so the power of your imagination,
Right.
that's one of the greatest things that God has given us is the ability to imagine. I believe it was Albert Einstein that talks about imagination being one of the highest forms of intellectualness. It's just, can you imagine and can you dare to dream and can you dare to have, these most craziest and outlandish thoughts? I mean, think about it, when we were young, our ability to just kind of be so creative and
Right.
imaginative and have imaginary friends and have all these wonderful things and ultimately that's really where God wants us to be back at. When we're talking about building a mindset of greatness, it's can you imagine yourself doing great things? Can you imagine yourself doing or being in that place where you long to be or where you feel like God is calling you to be? So those are all vital.
Absolutely. I have to share with you this. It came to mind as you were talking, and it's something I've never shared on air.
Oh,
This is
okay.
the first time. But when we talk about imagination, I think about when I was a little girl, I used to interview myself. So I would
Ooh.
have two chairs. I'd have a chair for the interviewer, which was me.
Yep, yep.
Then I would go back and answer the question, and I would pretend that I was on a show being interviewed. So I
Absolutely.
so I would interview. So my imagination was, I'm going to be somebody who's interviewing people.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? I was like, and so that kind of power, the power to imagine, and then the power to, when the opportunity opens the door for your imagination now to be activated, and the courage to go through, there's
Oh my goodness.
it's unbelievable. And that I think that's sometimes where the pivot is, because a lot of times things happen, we don't understand it, we don't get it, but something clicks, like, I this was something I thought of, this was something I want,
Absolutely.
this was something inside of me. Now I have the opportunity to do it.
Yeah. And you said something so major that really just kind of sparked something in me when you talk about courage.
Yeah.
I think that is something I'm really now starting to understand what courage is. And
Yes.
courage is like it is a thing. And it could be
Absolutely.
it's a
It's
difficult
a
thing.
huge part.
It is. And a lot of times that kind of goes unnoticed or it kind of goes falls by the wayside. But even in writing this book, I'll be honest with you, like I wrote the book and the book was done, but I struggled just getting it out there because it's like, listen, I'm putting this out for the world
That's right.
to see, to read, to critique,
Hmm.
all those things, and you never knew, or I never knew how much kind of courage you need just to do these things. And so,
Right.
just anybody who's watching this, like, listen, you don't give yourself enough credit for what you're doing, the courage it takes for you to do what you're doing, even Dr. Malika, what you're doing, the courage it takes. So yeah, that courage is a big thing that once you kind of discover that, it's amazing.
It is. It took me a while. Was telling somebody, the first 75 episodes of Pivot are audio.
Okay.
And when I decided that this season we would do video, YouTube, it took, from the time I made that decision to the time we aired, or the time we started, right, season 5, I it took forever, because like you said, you're exposing yourself. What if the background's not right, or what if
Oh my
what if I
gosh.
say something? I mean, and that courage has to kick in. There's a courage that everyone, I don't care if you are a successful rapper, author,
Better.
actor, or someone who is working day to day in the community, local community, whatever, right? Whatever you do, there's a level of courage that you have to exhibit in order to move forward and do the things that you're supposed to do, that you're born to do, or make that shift or make that change. You've got to have courage.
Absolutely. And a little bit of a secret that I'll let you in on. So I had a kind of a book coach, or a writing coach, I should say,
Okay.
who would just kind of help me in my writing process. Shout out to my dear Robinson. Shout out to you.
Madeira, shout out, girl. You know
Oh, she'll be
Madeira.
another person great to have on the show.
All
So
right.
she's phenomenal. So I remember talking to her, and she was talking about how my writing had to have a certain persona, and it had to have a certain level of boldness and those things. And so from that, so as you shared with everybody, my name is actually Terrance DeAndre Ellis. But she was like, "Hey, when you write, some people take on a pen name or
Hmm.
a
Hmm.
writing name, an author's name." So I started kind of going through the process of learning how to write and those things, and
Hmm.
I started noticing that my writing was a little bit different than who kind of I was as an individual. I'm very quiet. I can be very quiet. I'm a little bit of an introvert.
Okay.
I know, right? A preacher that's introvert. I mean,
No,
listen.
I get it. Trust me.
But
Yeah.
nevertheless, ultimately, as I started writing, like this voice really started waking up in me,
Hmm.
to the point where it's like, oh, okay. And so that's how I got the surname Terrance Dre, because it's like Terrance Dre shows up completely different than Terrance Ellis, who's the dad, who's the business person, the sales
Right.
guy. It's a little bit different. So that you'll find courage kind of even in that personality. And you'll see a lot of entertainers, they'll have kind of that alter ego, as they say.
Right.
And so obviously Beyonce is one of those, is one of the main ones. So was her Sasha Fierce, I think, is that her name?
Is this that? I
I
think
can't
so.
remember. I think
I
so.
think
But
so.
yeah, ultimately you'll find courage kind of in that name, in that voice, and in kind of what you do.
So the one thing that in the book, and folks will find as they go and purchase Pivoting for Greatness,
Yes.
Volume One. This is Volume One. Okay, so we are starting something that it isn't even finished. We're not even near finished yet.
Nope.
But you'll find that there are different parts of the book. There's a few scriptures,
Hmm.
there's some quotes, there's PSAs. It's
Yes.
talk a little bit about how you broke down the book um, for the reader to be able to reflect as
Yep.
they read and just the visuals. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll say from the jump. So as I said, I'm really an avid reader, and
Okay.
so I love reading a lot of business books. I love reading, just nonfiction.
Mhm.
And so what I started doing was I started noticing some of the books that I really gravitated to more.
Mhm.
They have kind of a common theme, and so I really started turning that into my writing. So I use a lot of storytelling.
Mhm.
And so my wife, a shout out to her, to May Ellis.
Shout out to May.
She is
We know
my,
her personally.
yes, absolutely. So she is my biggest, support. She's always there. But she said, you know what? When she first read my man, she said, you write like how you preach. And I was like, oh,
Mm,
that's interesting.
okay.
And so when I preach, I always used to use a lot of illustrative, components. I
Hmm.
always like to be very practical. I believe that was a big thing. People just need to understand kind of how do I go do, you're telling me to do this, but then how do I go do it?
Right.
And so really I wanted my writing to reflect that as well. So I do a lot of storytelling. So
Okay.
each chapter talks about a story or opens up with a story.
Hmm.
I do a lot of quotes again because I think helping kind of with the imagination, helping pulling some of that information. I did a lot of research for this.
Yeah.
So read tons of books, read tons of articles, just information. And so with all those things, I ultimately kind of try to package it into something that's easy to read, something that we can ultimately, pull from and gain from.
Mhm.
And again, whether you're a student, whether you're the teacher, whether you're a business person, it doesn't matter. I try to include various different, just practical, common sense type terminology. I did go a little high level as well,
Yes.
just for some of those who kind of more astute in their reading. So I
Right.
try to cover all bases, just because it was more or less what I like, and
Mhm.
so I try to write a book that I think I would like to read.
That's good. And does the compass have a
Ah,
meaning for
yes,
you?
absolutely. So I was playing with this. So the whole book itself, that you'll see that there's this diagram. I can't really get into all the details because we'll be here
Right.
forever. But ultimately, I've created this model called Domini Change.
Mm.
That's in the book. I explain a little bit about it, but ultimately, I was just playing one day with this compass that I had, and there's really more of just a kind of a thought that I had in my mind about how the compass brings a completion. And so I started playing with this compass, and ultimately I started figuring out that as I was doing certain things and utilizing the compass that has a
Yes.
pivot. So as I was doing that, I started putting things together. And as I said, this has been a 15-year journey. And so as I'm like, oh well, if I do this circle and connect it with this circle and connect, it's almost like doing a connected dots type thing.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And so volume one is really kind of dealing with there's going to be three volumes. And
Okay.
so volume one is dealing with kind of the first layer of just kind of who we are as individuals.
Hmm.
And so then we'll get into volume two, volume three. But ultimately, the compass had a meaning of just kind of bringing some completion to some things.
Okay.
And you'll see that as the various different volumes unfold, you'll see how it all comes to play.
I love it. I love it. I love the visuals because I think that everybody learns differently. And
Yes,
that when you're reading, I know for me, I when I look for books, I look for books that have visuals, and so that I can stop, the reading and kind of see
absolutely.
what they mean, but also the quotes. I'm always interested in quotes. I love the scripture. I mean, there's so much for anyone who is in need of this idea of pivoting, right? This
Yes,
idea of pivoting and pivoting for greatness, right? I'm not just pivoting, but there's
correct.
purpose in this. Um,
And
so
that's key, right? I think that's
right.
key is it's a buzzword, of course. Pivoting is a buzzword now.
Mhm.
That is a new buzz. And as I was thinking about the title, I forgot what title I had, but it had something to do with pivoting. And I just kept
Mhm.
telling myself, no, it's not just a pivot.
Right.
Anybody can pivot. Everybody pivots now. But it's like, no, you need to be intentional. But what are you pivoting for? So
Right. Right.
pivoting for greatness is most definitely what we're trying to do.
I love this. Your mission. Terrance Dre's mission is to inspire
Oh
and
yeah.
guide with futuristic insights and critical perspectives. You challenge conventional thinking. And you talked a little bit about that in the beginning when we talked a little bit about churches, but you challenge conventional thinking and you drive innovation, impacting various fields and empowering leaders and organizations to think and act beyond the norm. And so I think today, as we think through where we are and where we're headed, we're definitely in a place where thinking beyond the norm is becoming, for lack of a better word, okay. It's becoming,
Yes.
it's like, yes, this is the time to start challenging your thinking and think beyond the norms. How do you incorporate that even in your day to day? How do you challenge yourself to think beyond the norms? Um, like I said earlier, when you've been raised a certain way or when you only know one way, how do you challenge yourself and others around you to come out of that kind of thinking and challenge them to think differently?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I do is I find something consistent that I can that puts me into that space of creativity. And
Okay.
so for me, walking is like huge. I got to get outdoors and I got to walk.
Okay.
It does several things for me. Obviously, there are some health benefits, but for me, it's just more about kind of being in a creative space,
Hmm.
right? So the outdoors brings you. But one of the things that Tamay and I do, with our consulting business, is we teach people and we tell people kind of we look at it at a threefold way. So we say you got to be able to see through it,
Hmm.
got to be able to live in it, and then you got to be able to develop out of it.
Oh,
I'm gonna
that's
say it
good.
again.
Come on, say it for the people in the back.
I'm gonna say it
Okay.
again.
All right.
Absolutely. All right. So and then I'll break it down. So you want to see through it,
Hmm.
you want to live in it, and then you want to develop out of it. And
I
so
like that.
basically, when you're challenging yourself, when you're trying to kind of think outside of the box, you
Hmm.
got to see through it. You got to see from the beginning to the end, right? What do you want this to look like towards the end? So starting from the beginning, looking all the way through the end, you gotta have the ability. And when I talk about kind of being futuristic, you gotta have the ability to kind of see around the corner.
Mm. Okay.
um,
I like that.
right? So being able to see around the corner, and that's what a lot of great leaders do, is they have the ability, although they may be here in this present moment.
Hmm.
This was fascinating to me. I was reading an article about ESPN, and they were talking about how their board meetings, or excuse me, their meetings with upper management was all geared for 7 to 10 years. It had nothing to do with what was happening in the moment.
Yes.
That's not what their executive meetings were about. They're strictly were about 7 to 10 years from now.
Seven to
And what
ten
were some of the
years.
challenges? What were some of the things coming up? Again, seeing around the corner. What
Right.
what is what is about to be next?
Right.
And so we have to have that type of ability to kind of see around the corner, see through it, see through what are some of our challenges, what is opportunities that present itself, what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses, obviously the SWOT analysis,
Yes.
but that's all part of seeing through it. Once you've seen through something, then you got to learn how to live in it. So it's kind of just living through that space, living through that creativity, living through those moments where it doesn't feel good, where it's uncomfortable, where it
Yeah.
is comfortable, where it's like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing, or
Right.
I'm not good at this. All those things, right? All those emotions are going to come up.
Right.
This is all part of your creative process of living through it. And then, of course, once you've done that, you're going to develop out of it. So you want to build something without it necessarily needing you. And so that's the big component of it.
And those are the three, that's a three-prong approach you take with your consulting business.
Yes,
Wow.
absolutely.
So, we've talked about the book and we're talking about, of course, pivoting, but I'd like to move to what I call the self-care. And you
Oh yeah,
said walking is it's your jam.
absolutely,
It's what you
absolutely.
do. And so as we're pivoting, what are some things that you would recommend that folks do as far as self-care, like things that we can be doing to kind of activate the creativity
Yeah,
inside of us, um, activate the courage inside of us, because of course we talked about the courage that's needed, but there are some things that we can do that's just kind of, kind of self-care that really
absolutely.
could help spark those things in us. Do you have any thoughts on, that you want to share with folks on what they could do to really
Yeah.
help with that?
So I am a big proponent of um, just mental health
Yes.
and therapy. I am a huge proponent of it. If you
Wow.
have the ability to go to talk to somebody, have a therapist,
Mhm.
you have to do it. You'll be amazed of how freeing that becomes to let you be more creative, to let you be more free in thoughts. A
Yeah.
lot of times we're so weighed down with our life and what has happened in our life, what has happened to us, what is happening to our family, that it stymies the creative genes in us. It
Wow.
stymies that creative ability just because there's so much trauma in our life, there's so much issues, there's so many burdens, so many things are broken. And so that's always the first thing I always tell people is, hey, if you have access to a good therapist or if you can find one, let's most definitely do that. Really what happens with that is they give you the tools. And
Yes.
so with me having the tools, that's what now I have kind of a canvas, which is my walks, which now allows me to use my tools. So, if you're an artist and you have, all these great tools, you have canvas, that you can now really go create some things. And so I always say, if we can start off with therapy, you could do some type of exercise. As I said, I walk. Other people like to kickbox, or perhaps you like to do yoga or anything like that. Those are helpful things. Meditating is another big thing that really is helpful. And then I'll probably say the final thing that I used to do. I used to do youth ministry for about 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I always used to tell, one of the things we always used to do with our kids, with the youth, is that we always just kind of take them like to a park and we just go dream.
Yeah.
Right. Let's just go sit in the park and let's just go imagine. Let's just go dream. And so that's another thing. If you could just turn off the TV, turn
Mm-hmm.
off social media, put the phone down,
Right.
and literally just sit, I don't care if it's on your porch, I don't care if it's in a park, and it could be listen on your couch, but just
Right.
literally let your mind go and just allow it just to kind of go and just be free and
Mm-hmm.
dream.
I love that. I love that.
Hey, Pivot family, this is Terrance Dre. You are watching Pivot with Dr. Malika.
So I thought I had these two questions that I wanted
Yeah.
to ask, and I know this will be fun. What's your favorite scripture?
Ooh.
Who inspires you?
So I have to say my favorite scripture is Isaiah 55.
Okay.
And
Okay.
that is, of course, where Jesus, or where it's prophesied about Jesus saying, that he's been called to preach glad tidings to the poor. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me to preach glad tidings to the poor. So I think that's a huge thing because I believe that glad tidings obviously is just uplifting people.
Mhm.
And that was really Jesus' mission. And I feel like that is kind of what God has called me to do, is just uplift people. So that is my favorite scripture.
Mhm.
I'm going to say who inspires me.
Who inspires you? Because you want to inspire others.
Yes.
Where do you get your inspiration? Who do you get it?
So I got a couple people.
Okay.
So shout out to my pastor, Dr. Shamari White, here in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Shout
Uh,
out.
yep, he is a great inspiration. Of course, my parents are always inspirational. So Bishop Wayne Ellis and First Lady Teresa Ellis.
Yes,
Um, my wife, she's a huge inspiration for me. Um,
absolutely.
And then I would probably say more just on a from a distance level. I like Adam Grant is a guy that I really dig. So he's kind of this futuristic type writer. So he's actually wrote this book called Think Again.
Okay.
And so he deals a lot with on the intellectual side of things.
Mhm.
And so he's a great inspiration as well.
I just love what you're doing. I want to just take just a few minutes to remind folks where they can grab Pivoting for Greatness Volume 1, Lead, Adapt, Transform the Compass to Greatness. So, where can folks purchase this book?
Yeah, so you can go to my website, terrancedre.com. That's TerranceDre.com. You'll find us on Amazon as well. And yes, please go pick up a copy. Please support your brother. I would appreciate it for sure. You can find
Yeah.
me Facebook, YouTube, excuse me, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Terrance Dre is my handle for those things. Instagram, again, I'm not deep in them streets yet, but I'm coming. I'm coming.
So, as I want to give you an opportunity to share about two or three um, strategies that you would share with someone who is pivoting right now? So we could talk about an individual, we can talk about the business, and if your strategies would go across those, that's fine. But someone's pivoting right now and they're really struggling with courage, or really struggling with making that next step, right? Um, 2 or 3 things you would say to them today.
Yeah, and I'm gonna probably pull some of these things from the book, just kind of give you a little precursor. I want to give you all everything, but I'll give you two things. So, number one, I think it's important that we understand our identity.
Mm-hmm.
That is kind of the number one thing. I can tell you all the great things that you want to hear. Dr. Malik can share all those. You can watch all these great podcasts. You can watch all these inspirational videos. You can do all these things.
Right,
But if you really don't have a grasp of your identity, of you as an individual, as your organization, whatever you may be leading, whoever you may be leading, if you don't have just a solid grasp of kind of who are we, who
right.
am I, what am I, what do we do, what are we called to do?
Mm-hmm.
I believe if you don't have a grasp on those things, that's step number one. And then step number two is to, again, really find out who have you been called to do? Like we've all been called to serve, whether
Right,
you know it or not. You know, whether, again, you're leading that Fortune 500 company, whether you're in higher ed, whether you're an entrepreneur, a teacher, it doesn't matter, a creative. We've all been called to serve somebody, or to serve someone, or a particular group, community. So you got to find out, what does that community need?
right,
Because that's the best way for us to show up. When you understand who you are, and
right.
then also who you serve, that's how you can find out, how do I show up best in this place. So you got to start there with those two things, is what I'm most definitely saying.
Yeah, I think there's so much success. I think, one could come up with something or be creative and make lots of money from it, but it's when you are serving others, when
Absolutely.
you, I believe we were all, like you said, we're all put on the earth to do something, but more importantly, to make things better, to expand, to grow a community, a people, a group. And so when you're doing that, it makes it makes a world of a difference. No pun intended, but it makes a world of difference. It makes a world of a difference when you're succeeding financially,
Yeah.
emotionally, socially, when you're serving someone, a group, and really making that difference. That you can't put a
That
price on that.
you can, and that is really where you'll find the most, the biggest fulfillment. I think there's a reason why, um, people, a lot of people who have money, a lot of people who have kind of everything that you imagine, sometimes they're still not happy.
Right,
Sometimes they're still not fulfilled. And that's because there's literally something inside of them, that God has placed on the inside of us for us to do, which kind of
right.
leads into my motto, purpose over preference.
Yes,
You have a purpose in life. Everybody has a purpose in life. Everything, every entity, every organization has a purpose in life. And it's not until you figure out what that thing is, again, going back to your identity,
right.
once you really figure that out and you start riding in that purpose, you'll soon start finding out you prefer some other things. But then eventually it's like purpose really kind of always rules the day. Purpose is always kind of the number one thing, the top priority. And that's where you're going to find life fulfillment.
Well, yeah, see, yes, because purpose brings you back to purpose, right?
Absolutely.
When you're running away from it, when you're like, no, I've got this to do, when you're distracted, purpose will bring you back to purpose.
All the
You know what I
time.
mean?
Every single
Every
time.
time. Now it's your decision to say
Yes,
no, right?
absolutely.
But
Because
purpose,
you may want to go with your preference.
yeah, exactly,
You may want to
exactly.
go for your
But
preference.
purpose
Absolutely.
will bring you back to purpose.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I like that. Oh my goodness. So listen, Pivot family, we have been blessed to have
Oh my
Terrance Dre
gosh.
with us here on Pivot with Dr. Malika. I want you to go to his website, which is terrancedre.com. Check out who he is, his work, the book. You can check it out again on Amazon, and on the website, correct?
That is correct.
And so please, 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 and be looking for. Come on, we're gonna call
Hey,
him
let's
out
talk
in
about
these streets. We're gonna
it. Let's talk about it. We gonna show up. We're gonna show up in these streets.
we're
I'm
gonna
gonna be
come
like,
up.
hey,
We
surprise.
listen. Look for him on these streets, on these social media streets. He's coming out. He's gonna come out
That's
in these
right.
streets a little
That's right.
bit.
That's right.
But we just
My mom was kicking me out. You remember you had to go outside.
yeah. And
Listen, when you
don't
came
come
home from
back in
school
until I
and
tell
don't
you.
exactly. So my team is kicking me out of the house. They said, listen,
Yes.
you got to go in these social media streets. So I'm
You
about to
gotta
be
go
out
up
here
in these
playing with y'all.
streets. Absolutely, because you can still be you can still be introverted in them streets. Trust me when I
Yes.
tell you. You just gotta figure out how you flow.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
But we're just so glad to have you. And so thank you so much for being here on Pivot with Dr. Malaika. Any last words, any last things you want to drop with the Pivot family?
Oh my goodness. Well, listen, I'm so grateful. Thank you so much for having me. Privet family, thank you for embracing me. I truly thank each one of you. And listen, I want you to go be great. As Dr. Malika talks about, go be great.
Yeah,
Greatness is within your grasp. It is nothing too hard. There's nothing that you can't do.
absolutely.
If you have the courage just to take the first step. I think Dr. Martin Luther King said, faith is taking the first step without seeing the rest of the staircase. And so I want to encourage somebody, you're watching this, listen, take that first step.
Hmm.
Don't worry about, everything else. Don't worry about how everything else is going to fall into place. Just go have the courage to take the first step and go be great. Be great in your first step.
All right, y'all. Thank you so much. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
not a problem.
All right, y'all. Well, thank you so much for joining us and stay tuned. There's so much more that we have this season, and I can't wait to share with you more conversations with folks on Pivot with Dr. Malika.